in the late years of the 16th century, soon after his downfall in 1593, seriously trying to remain unidentified, Christopher Marlowe, the true Shakespeare, allegorically disclosed in a remarkable book, in 1595 with the Latin title PSEUDONYM, roughly meaning, the multiplicity of meanings. The ways or means, to enable the reader to judge his destiny, that is, his, Marlowe's personal downfall, and tragic fate.
2 years thereafter in 1597, a remarkable series of commonplace books, beginning with PSEUDONYM, Wit's Commonwealth, appeared by an, up to now never identified English anthologist, John BODENHAM. Both books can actually only have been written by the same author. PSEUDONYM, as measured by a large number of its reprints, must have been so popular and successful, that a year later, the author published a second part entitled, Pallades Tamir, Wit's Treasury, being the second part of Wit's Commonwealth. The author, however, was no longer called John BODENHAM, but Francis Mears, Master of Arts of both universities. Only a small section of this work, entitled, A Comparative Discourse of Our English Poets, is better known to the world today and to Shakespeare experts, as it became the guideline for the dating of the origin of Shakespeare's early plays. With Pallades Tamir, it is irritating, that Mears emphasizes in the epistle to the reader, that also the first part of Wit's Commonwealth, PSEUDONYM, also came from him. Consequently, after John BODENHAM, Francis Mears can really only have been another pseudonym of the same author. For various logical reasons, Francis Mears must have been an artificial figure. A pseudonym? A pen name? Let me give some exemplary reasons. Francis Mears in Pallades Tamir tells us, that Michael Drayton is now penned in English verse a poem called Pellew Albion. It is neither thinkable nor likely, that Francis Mears in 1598 could have known all about this project, which appeared only 14 years later in 1612 as Drayton's mighty Pellew Albion. Significant incontrovertible arguments have been collected, that Marlowe had taken the name Drayton as one of his many cover names or pseudonyms. Mears in Pallades Tamir confessed, that two excellent poets in England, Christopher Marlowe, and George Chapman, imitated the ancient story of Hero and Leander in the same argument and subject. Consider, that Marlowe's Hero and Leander was printed for the first time only in 1598 and Chapman's continuation many months later in 1598. How could Mears know at that extreme early time, that Chapman had finished Marlowe's allegedly unfinished Hero and Leander, by imitating Marlowe in the same argument and subject?
What may be, in this context, the meaning of Ovid's two Latin lines, added by the alleged author, Francis Mears, to the Marlowe-Chapman story? Together with the last four highly associative concluding lines of this epilogue?
Be aware. The 5 last Latin lines of Ovid's same epilogue, not printed in Mears' book, are even more revealing. The best part of me will be born, immortal, beyond the distant stars. Wherever Rome's influence extends over the land, it is civilized. I will be spoken on people's lips, and famous through all the ages. If there is truth in poets' prophecies, I shall live. Mears also included and listed Edward de Vere, 17th Earl of Oxford, as a playwright, the best for comedy, and in the same paragraph mentioned contemporary playwrights such as Shakespeare. This grotesquely is taken as evidence today, that Shakespeare's plays were actually written by Edward de Vere. Even though no comedy of Edward de Vere has ever been discovered, let alone been written. Ovid's Latin title phrase on Politeutheuia, see Tibi etc., freely translated, says, "If nature denies you your shape, replace it with the wealth of your genius."
This cannot be without a deeper meaning. Isn't it a blueprint of Marlowe's actual fatal situation?
But also the Latin title phrase of Francis Mears' Pallades Tamiae, Viviger Ingenio, can be interpreted as an allegoric metaphor for Marlowe, who had survived and was dead. At the same time, his ingenious wit has survived, is immortal. Whereas his remainings are dead, that is no more existent. Consider that Mears' motto, Viviger Ingenio, can also be found at other contemporary books. Did all these poets, Weaver, Peacham, Wither, Anonymous, Mears take that motto because they regarded themselves as poetic geniuses? Or is there a more plausible explanation for all the poets having chosen the same emblematic Latin title phrase? For instance, that these author names represented pen names or pseudonyms similar to the name Shakespeare, of the only true contemporary poet genius.
For George Wither, the argumentation being a pen name for Marlowe has been demonstrated earlier, convincingly enough.
A certain John BODENHAM today is inextricably associated not only with Politeutheuia and Pallades Tamiae but with other most amazing so-called commonplace books, during the late reign of Elizabeth. They are sometimes referred to as the Bodenham Miscellanies, or Bodenham Anthologies, even though beyond their book producers, as Nicholas Ling, virtually nothing is known or ascertained about authors, who must have had a significant input in these books. The commonplace book Belvedere, or The Garden of the Muses, presents almost 4,500, unattributed, quotations of one- or two-line passages from contemporary English writers, including Shakespeare, Marlowe, and many others, arranged under 67 thematic headings such as, of God, of love, of hate, of truth, etc. Belvedere, or The Garden of the Muses in 1600, constitutes the verse equivalent to what Pallades Tamiae in 1598, and Wit's Theatre in 1599 provided before, in prose.
Bodenham's works can be regarded as complementary. Wit's Commonwealth. Aphoristic wisdom in striking sentences. Pallades Tamiae. Ingenious connections by means of similitude. Wit's Theatre. Examples as authoritative precedents. The composer of Belvedere arranged its material artistically. A. Under thematic headings. B. In decasyllabic verse. C. Under each topical heading, with an initial couplet in slightly larger type. D. With 3 different kinds of passages. E. Sentences consisting of decasyllabic single lines or rhyming couplets. F. With 2-line similes on the same subject and g. Two-line examples likewise on the same.
In Belvedere, lines of Shakespeare's or Marlowe's works are silently unrecognizable for anyone, mingled with lines from many other writers appearing. The extracts of so many alleged different contemporary authors on every page are so arranged as to make them appear as the original compositions of Bodenham himself.
Walter Bigley, who suspected Francis Bacon behind Bodenham, in 1905 wrote,
"How could a plain master John Bodenham, presumably a country gentleman, of whom is nothing known, be privileged to taste or prepare such a haggis of feeding as we meet in Belvedere?"
It seems virtually impossible that in 1598-99, at the height of Shakespeare, when Belvedere must have been composed, an unidentifiable, unknown John Bodenham could have arranged and structured such a gigantic new literary creation of wisdom in the form of verses, with a sheer incomprehensible amount of knowledge, memory, erudition, artistry and literary productive power. The majority of the many authors of all these many single and double lines in Belvedere were eventually carved out and disclosed, such as Shakespeare, Breton, Barnfield, Chapman, Churchyard, Drayton, Fletcher, Griffin, Hayward, Markham, Sylvester, Southwell and so many more. Analyzed and recognized on this YouTube channel as multiple pseudonyms of Marlowe. As ridiculous and unthinkable it always appeared to unimaginative Shakespeare scholars.
To get a glimpse of an idea of what kind of literary adaptations and new creations the alleged author, Bodenham, has made on earlier texts of some 40 alleged genuine authors, you should reflect this page for a while, and compare exemplarily some Belvedere lines with some Shakespeare lines. From Lucrece and Venus and Adonis. Can anyone really assume or imagine that Bodenham's contextual alterations of the original Shakespeare poetical texts, as well as of all the other later identified poet names and texts, were not written by the singular poet genius of his age, under his multiple pen names such as Shakespeare, Drayton, Chapman and so many more, but instead by an obscure unknown, unauthorized nobody, John Bodenham? To repeat it, direct and straightforward, John Bodenham, a never identified hoax, makes not enough sense whatsoever. Only the unimaginably prolific, versatile universal poet genius himself, behind Bodenham's Belvedere and his other alleged anthologies, can have had a motive, the background knowledge, and the artistic abilities to make such subtle, often substantive textual and contextual changes. The following author names all have been identified by their printed texts. Texts that in reality were printed under pseudonyms of the true poet genius. Not exclusively. Including Shakespeare, Barnfield, Breton, Chapman, Churchyard, Daniel, Drayton, Fletcher, Griffin, Gilpin, Harrington, Lodge, Markham, Marlowe, Southwell, Whetstone, etc., etc. This seems difficult to imagine and digest, but all facts collected so far do not allow a more plausible or better explanation for the Bodenham issue, as well as for the authorship problem as a whole.
The title emblem of Belvedere obviously was intended to unveil us the key to the unsolved question of who is, or who was, behind Belvedere, the Garden of the Muses. Which reminds us, by the way, to another title emblem 2 years earlier, of Marlowe's Hero and Leander, in 1598, also with a marigold flower, offering us the key. Why Marlowe continued, by no means finished, his Hero and Leander, with one of his more famous pseudonyms, George Chapman.
The Latin title words circling the Belvedere text of the book, Parnasso et Apolline Digna, clearly indicate that the author is worthy of the sacred heights of the Muses of Parnassus.
The title emblem of Belvedere shows a sun, shining on 2 strange elevations, between which a tree grows. A marigold flower grows at the foot of the left, further back elevation, and violet at the foot of the front right elevation. The woodcut symbolizes the divided nature of the author, whose first life blossomed publicly as a sun-like marigold, Marlowe, and his second life as a concealed violet, Shakespeare. Be aware that the true Shakespeare in his Sonnet 25 also compared his first glorious life with the flower marigold, lit by the shining sun, before he, in his glory died.
In Sonnet 25 we hear, great princes' favourites their fair leaves spread, but as the marigold, at the sun's eye, and in themselves their pride lies buried. For at a frown they in their glory die. Also, note, in Pericles, Pericles' daughter Marina is expressing to strew thy green with flowers, the yellows, blues, the purple violets, and marigolds, shall, as a carpet, hang upon thy grave, while summer days do last.
One wonders why we find the emblem of Belvedere also on William Warner's book A Continuance of Albion's England, in 1606. A logical and plausible answer would be if we again consider that both authors, John BODENHAM of Belvedere, and William Warner of Albion's England, represented cover names of the singular true poet genius. This makes immediate sense, if we consider that William Warner translated and transformed the Roman play by Plautus into an English play, in 1595. Who else at the time was capable to do that at all? A comedy about several mistaken identities, the play accepted today as the actual source of Shakespeare's play, The Comedy of Errors.